Howdy. So I remember being at Art Center College of Design, trying to do branding for a little grocery store. Anyone ever heard of Galco's? It's in Eagle Rock? Yeah, pretty cool. So Highland Park, okay. Yes, I know it makes a difference. So I was trying to do this branding, and I was struggling. I was trying to do a logo, and I'm not good at logos, even though I was studying graphic design. And I remember I had this amazing mentor, and I hope that you've gotten to meet someone like this in your life, because he was the kind of person that could look inside you and like rip out your soul and show it to you. And for a moment, you could see who you actually were and what you need to do. And he told me, Dan, you're just too practical, and that's why you're struggling. And you just need to go play. Because you are so practical that you'll take the impractical things that you do and you'll make them practical. And it took me a little while to like figure out exactly what he had to say, but I started to play. So this is John Neese, the guy who runs Galco's there, and they sell 500 kinds of soda, but they're all in the glass bottle. And that's what makes them special, is because soda can, first it's a can, and second, when it's in a bottle, they use sugar cane versus corn syrup, and so it just tastes better. And I'm not a big soda drinker, but when they have 50 kinds of root beer and 30 kinds of orange soda, it's pretty fun. And so I started to play around, kind of making these different sculptures and thinking about, oh, could I light things in different ways? And oh, could I put all these bottles on top of their store? And so people would notice that as they drive by. But I love the way that a bottle makes noise, right? When you kind of blow on it, it goes, ooh. So I thought, oh, man, maybe I could drive around town with these bottles on top of my car, and unfortunately this one didn't work. Eventually I got a friend, he would like push it up and down. That didn't work either, but I'm passionate about things, and so I kept going, and eventually I got the right angle and the right distance and make this beautiful noise. And go woo, 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 all about 30 miles an hour. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be awesome to put them on the side of a taco truck stand? So as it drove along, it would make music, right? Just like an ice cream truck. And then a friend of mine, she's a musician, and she had perfect pitch. And she'd go around all these bottles and blow on them, and she gave me this scale. And I don't know anything about music, but I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to make a pipe organ out of these soda pop bottles? And that's essentially the way that my life works, is that I have no idea how to do things that I'm trying to do, but I ask lots of questions, and I try to find the right weird, unusual folks to make them happen. And what's crazy is this is actually what got me to this place. This is NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. And how many people have actually been there? Oh, awesome, cool. So for those of you that maybe don't know exactly what goes on there, there's about 5,000, actually there's 6,000 people there now. And we're doing anything from landing robots on Mars to looking at stars and galaxies far away with telescopes, to actually one thing that we do is we study the Earth, which most people don't know about. We actually have about 17 different satellites that help us understand our oceans and earthquakes and the atmosphere and different types of things. And so this isn't the natural next step, but I ended up getting to meet the director of the Jet Propulsion Lab, and I had 2 seconds to sell myself. And I went up to him and I said, wouldn't it be cool to have artists involved in brainstorming future missions? And he was like, great, that sounds wonderful, because he's an amazing guy and he's always excited. And then he actually just really turned around and walked away. And he had to get to another meeting. And so I was like, oh, how am I going to get a hold of this guy now? And so I'd been sending my resume in next day air, because who has ever thrown away a FedEx? You know, no, most people don't throw away FedExes. And it's like human nature, you have to open it. Well, I wasn't around, my wife was, she went to the store, they didn't have letter-sized envelopes. They only had these gigantic envelopes, and she sent it anyways. So he got this giant envelope with a little resume in it, and I bugged him a bit, and he sent me on to some people, and they thought, oh, you're an artist, you must know how to do animations. We need an animator. And I said, well, I didn't know how to animate. I'll do whatever it takes to work at this place, because it's amazing. But this bottle project, like, this is what I'm passionate about. And that was a bit of a risk, you know. I just graduated from Art Center. We just had a kid, cost a lot of money, in debt. And in fact, the first paycheck that I got from JPL was the week that we ran out of money. So to ask that at that moment was kind of hard, but he kind of looked at me funny and he was like, well, I don't really get what you do, but I'm going to give you 6 months and we'll see what happens. And so that was 14 years ago, and now I get to have this amazing team. And this is mainly the people that are full-time, and then we have a number of full-time contractors and a bunch of freelancers that we work with. And they're from all sorts of different backgrounds, and we kind of do a couple of things that we talk about. One thing, we help people think through their thinking. And so we're not necessarily going to solve their equations or anything, but we're going to ask them different questions than they're accustomed to, and hopefully they get a different perspective on what it is that they do. And then the other area is sneaking up on learning, and I'll get to that a bit more. This is a bit more about the thinking through the thinking areas. We have this room that we call left field. So ideas come out of left field in this area, and it's a great place to kind of brainstorm and kind of be a little kid again, right? And we're there on lots of different capacities, whether it's facilitating brainstorming or just sort of being in the corner, sort of trying to think, well, is this what you mean? Because just because you have 2 or 3 scientists that are there, it doesn't mean that they think the same way or know the same thing. And hopefully, I'm sure you've been there before, brainstorming and realizing that that person has no idea what I'm actually talking about, and you thought that maybe they did. And so sometimes having something in front of their face helps them all get on the same page. When I first got to JPL, they were trying to find planets around other stars. And I had watched Star Trek and Star Wars, and I was like, oh, yeah, but that's like all on TV. But they were like, no, we're actually finding planets around other stars, and we're looking for a planet like Earth somewhere. And I was like, I don't know, you making jokes there. But they would give me all these big numbers, and I'm not a math person, so I need to make something. And so I had to be able to create something to help me understand what they were talking about. And I ended up using sand as an analogy. So this is a grain of sand right there, thing in the center, and there's a little hole in it. So I had them drill a hole into this little teeny tiny grain of sand. It's actually with a carbide drill bit. So the grain of sand represents the Milky Way galaxy. We live in the Milky Way. There's hundreds of billions of stars in our Milky Way galaxy. We live in that little teeny tiny area, but we've also found thousands and thousands and thousands of other planets around other stars within that little teeny tiny area. And our technology is so poor right now is that we can hardly see anything that's actually out there. So we're going to find tens of thousands of planets within this little tiny area, let alone the rest of the galaxy. And then if you wanted to put together all the other galaxies that we know about, you'd need 60 rooms full of sand to show all the other galaxies that we know about. And so I would have a whole bunch of sand, and this would be under a magnifying glass, and you'd look at it, and you'd either get like a profound sense of smallness, or hopefully I'd hope that you'd look at it and go, wow, you know, what we have here is special and meaningful, and maybe we should think about what we do. Some of our projects kind of start in weird spots. This is a beautiful hallway at JPL. It's very beautiful. These are 3 conference rooms, and a famous scientist was going to show up. And this famous scientist studies planets around other stars. And so the person who ran the program in that area said, can you please decorate this area for us? And so this was a fairly new building. It was a few years old, and they had these acrylic boxes outside of each of the conference rooms, and they were meant for posters, but no one had ever put a poster in them. So we thought, why don't we put a poster there? And they're like, oh, great, you could show, you know, picture of the spacecraft. And my buddy David Delgado, who's on the team, he had this other idea. He said, well, what if, you know, back in the day, there were these amazing posters that were travel posters, and they sort of called you to another world. And at that time, if you grew up, Egypt was impossibly far away, but you wanted to go, right? And it was sort of calling you. And so he said, what if we do these travel posters other worlds? And so what we always like to do is, whenever I work on any project, is try to figure out what is something really special about your product, service, what exoplanet, whatever it happens to be. And so in this particular case, there's really a planet that has two suns, like Tatooine in Star Wars, right? So what would be special about that? Well, you'd have two shadows, right? There's another planet that its sun is so different than ours that if it had plants, the plants would look red instead of green. So that's kind of fascinating. And then there's, these are some of the posters that we ended up putting together. And then we kind of did it as if we were travel agents trying to get you to these places if we live 500, 1,000 years in the future. And so this is the land of two suns where your shadow always has company, right? They're always kind of funky like that, right? Kepler 186f, where the grass is always redder on the other side, right? And so all these things, well, we ended up putting them up, and they became really popular. Conceptually, this is one of my favorite ones because this is the scientists didn't want to do this planet because they said it's going to be too hard because this is a planet that doesn't have a sun. So how do you do something cool about a planet that doesn't have a sun? Well, it's where the nightlife never ends, right? So this is like the Vegas of those places, and so you'd go there and party. And what happens in PSOJ 318.5-22 stays there, right? And so eventually these kind of got out from they were just meant for that hallway, and they ended up getting some media, which was great. And then this is the lady who actually we did the posters for originally, and she ended up showing them at TED, which was really great. What's funny is that they're all public domain, so you can all take these things and sell them in different ways. And so you can buy all sorts of weird stuff. You can even get a whiskey flask in our posters, which is kind of funny. And then we ended up doing a whole bunch of them. If you just search for travel posters, NASA, or visions of the future, these are all super high res. You can print them out, do whatever you want. But this was, they've kind of been translated in various languages, which is kind of fun. But this is what it was all about. And I don't normally read my slides, but I love this one. I got lots of emails, and this one said, I would like to acquire the posters so I can hang them in our child's nursery. That's great, awesome. My wife isn't pregnant now, but we plan to start trying in the next few months. Great, thanks. Would like my son, daughter growing up dreaming big. And so you never know quite what's going to happen, from a little hallway to, new life, I suppose, right? So there's a room at JPL. Some of you guys might have seen it. It's this room. And this is where all the information that comes to and from spacecraft that are beyond the moon go through this room. And so the Europeans, all of NASA, the Japanese, the various countries all use this system. And so we ended up making a sculpture, and it's using the real-time data from there. And so as lights come down, at that moment, we're receiving data from a spacecraft, and when lights go up, at that moment, we're sending data to a spacecraft. And depending on how much data is going back and forth, there'll either be a lot of lights going up and down, or just a little bit of lights going back and forth. And so Voyager, it's 40 years old. This is 40th anniversary. It's beyond the edge of the solar system. We still communicate to it every day, pretty much. But it can hardly send any information back and forth. So it's like this little teeny drip kind of coming down, whereas other spacecraft that are newer and have newer sensors and stuff like that are able to send back and forth lots of information. So this is in the director's lobby, and so the director can always kind of walk through and kind of get a sense of what's happening that day. So this is, this was funny because the previous director just retired about a year ago, and so we ended up making a little version for him, and so he has it on his desk at Caltech now. So he can keep in touch with what's going on. So it's kind of fun. So that's a very visual way of seeing the world, or seeing the data that we're working with. This data is flowing to and from these giant antennas. And there's 3 locations around the world. And the idea is that they're equidistant from each other, so that if I'm trying to talk to you and the Earth is spinning, I can't talk to you anymore, so this one turns on. And then if that one turns off, this one turns on. And so I got to go fly out there and see this place with my friend David again. And it was funny because you were out in the desert, and it was super quiet. But there was like all this stuff going, like we were learning about, oceans on moons of planets around, Jupiter and Saturn, and all this information's going back and forth. But you couldn't hear it, you couldn't see it, you couldn't really tangibly understand it. And so we thought, well, maybe there's another way of dealing with data. And so we wanted to play with sound. We never really played with sound before. And so we thought, well, what if you could close your eyes, and much like you hear a bird flying across the sky, you could hear where a spacecraft is. Because we don't get to see those, right? Every once in a while you can see one at night going by. And so what we ended up doing is coming up with this, we worked with a sound installation composer, and he ended up giving all the satellites that NASA has that studies the Earth a voice. And so there's 19 different satellites that NASA has that studies the Earth. And so each one sort of gets a voice. And we ended up working with an architecture firm in New York called Studio KCA to develop this. And this is at the Huntington Gardens right now, if you've ever been there. And what happens is that when you walk inside, if you stand in the center and you hear a sound, hundreds of miles away in that direction is a satellite right at that moment. A little bit later in the day, it'll move to a different spot and different spot. And this is sort of what it feels like when you're inside. So unfortunately, you can't tell it from this sound system, but we have like a surround sound on steroids system there. And so you'll hear sounds all over the place. And this is what's so beautiful is that people go in there and they just like close their eyes and want to sort of meditate. I don't know what exactly they want to do, but it's great, It's great to see, especially with something that's about space and about data. It's a calming thing versus like a frenetic thing. Okay? And there's one moment that sounds like some voices singing, and that's the International Space Station. It's the only one that sort of sounds like that. This is it. So it was really beautiful one night. It was dusk, and I could actually see the International Space Station flying by and hear that voices kind of coming out from the right spot. I was like, oh, it works. Look at that. It actually works. So that was beautiful. It'll be there until next September, and then we're looking for a permanent location for it somewhere. So, one of the cool things is that we're really embedded with the scientists and engineers. We're not like off in some other department. And sometimes that allows for interesting things to happen. And this is a spacecraft called Juno. Juno is at Jupiter right now. It's been taking some amazing images of Jupiter. And but before it got there, we didn't have a big enough rocket for it to just get to Jupiter. It actually had to go and use the gravity of Earth to slingshot us out to Jupiter. And so we had this moment where the spacecraft was going to go far away out towards Mars, then come back towards the Earth and get really, really close. And then we'll never see it again. And so we're trying to think, what could we do to kind of get people to know about this thing or communicate with it in some way? And so we kind of went old school, old school social media. If you remember Morse code and ham radio operators, that's how old school it was. And I'm going to show you a little video. If you want to bring the house lights down a little bit for this.
This is my transmitter. Maybe it's something you can use, I don't know.
Hi Juno experiment is something that a group of us came up with.
The biggest challenge we had was we didn't know if this was going to work or not.
If it works, you know, I'm part of history.
This is W6JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Hello, CQ, CQ, CQ.
The Earth's flyby is Juno's way of gaining some extra speed, changing direction so that its orbit can take it to Jupiter.
We said, what if we actually sent something to Juno? Basically came up with the idea that we could send Morse code to Juno, enlist the support of amateur radio operators around the world.
So the intent is to join amateur radio community together in a coordinated transmission from Earth to the Juno spacecraft as it flies by.
The website would tell them, okay, key down now, then key up, transmit for 30 seconds. And that's how we would send a DIT. Everybody knows Morse code is dit, 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 da, da. Well, it turns out to say hi to Juno, it takes 4 DITs in space and then 2 DITs for the eye.
I thought, wow, that's a neat thing to do, and they're going to need a lot of people to pull this thing off. I said, I'm good to go.
We're getting ready right now. Here we go.
And now we are transmitting here.
They could hear ham radio operators all over the world doing this, which was really remarkable.
Everybody's doing this at the same time. Thousands and thousands of hams.
With any luck, the Juno spacecraft will be able to listen and hear all these amateur radio transmissions.
And so what we're doing now is we're looking at the data that's come down to see if we can put together that signal that says, hi.
Will it work? Who knows?
I have the audio from Juno. I'd love you to listen to it.
Come on. This is it.
This sounds very cool.
Actually worked and it hurt us.
When you think about what it is, it was really, really amazing.
How many times do you get to say hi to a spacecraft that's swinging by your planet?
To be a part of it, that was very great.
More than thinking about what it means to me, I think it's just such a great thing that humankind has the ability to think beyond our own environment. It's the curiosity, it's the adventuring spirit, I think, that the space program has given us.
Hi, Juno!
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno! Hi, Juno!
Hi, Juno. Goodbye, thank you.
Okay, take 17.
That was a lot of fun to do. And what was crazy about that project is it actually happened during the government shutdown a few years ago. And so it was actually illegal for us to tell anybody about it or even to turn it on. Fortunately, we had it set to auto start before that rule came across. So it was great to be able to do something fun and hopefully meaningful to the people that were involved with people around the world. So that's what I get to do during the day. I get to have an amazing job there. And then I work on various projects around the world with other folks. If you've ever been to the San Jose airport, there's a piece there. We could turn this one down a little bit. This is called the ECloud, and we used liquid crystal. Liquid crystal is something that if you add electricity to it, it becomes transparent. So lights aren't flashing, it's just something becoming transparent and opaque. and we have a display there that shows a list of cities in the world, and the weather from those cities affect the patterns that you see. So if it's really windy in a city, it'll look windy. If it's rainy in a city, it'll look rainy. And I always like to say if it's Los Angeles, it looks broken because it's not doing anything. But this material really wasn't meant for this. It's really meant for like big windows and conference rooms and that sort of stuff. But we love to be able to create poetry out of you know, different technology. Actually, I mean, it's really about story, and the technology is helping us tell the story versus just having something flash. You know, if it's just flashing, that's cool. But if it's a cloud, all of a sudden it becomes something much more meaningful and beautiful. We're working on that was with Aaron Koblin and Nick Hoffermas. David Delgado and Nick and I are working on another project. This is in San Diego. This is a huge parking garage by the airport. And we've been working, the sort of idea came from, there are these ships called Dazzle ships that used to be in the bay there in San Francisco. And these, they would paint them all these different patterns so that your eyes would be confused if you were the enemy and you wouldn't necessarily be able to see the ships as they were moving around the ocean. And so we kind of used that basic framework of patterns and black and white. We've been working with e-ink. If you have a Kindle, the screen is made out of e-ink, and so it just turns black and white. And so they've developed this new technology for us that we have these tiles that are about this big, and each one, it's solar powered and it's wireless. And so we kind of put all these things up, and they become little pixels up on the wall. And then we just took this footage a couple days ago. Hopefully you can we'll see there. Kind of see what's happening on the wall there. And what's cool is that it kind of feels like the wind, feels just like the wind blowing the palm trees. And we're working on various sort of patterns to make it feel like traffic moving back and forth because it's right next to I-5. And so if you're down there, hopefully this thing will be all up and running here real soon. Got that? I got that. So I get strange emails. I don't know if you guys get strange emails, and they're not just the ones from, you know, third world countries trying to get you to, you know, move their bank accounts and stuff like that. But I got this, mine are usually about aliens, so that's what they usually are. But I got this email from a friend of mine. His name is Ivan Amato, and he's a writer. And he saw a talk that I gave, and he said, Dan, there needs to be a museum of awe, and you need to run it. And I was like, oh, cool, man. Okay, awesome. I got to like get work done, right? I got to be busy. And he's like, no. He was like calling me up and bugging me. He's like, no, there needs to be a museum of awe, and that you need to run it. And it was like, oh, wow, you know, that sounds fascinating. You know, what is the Museum of Awe? And so I've mentioned David Delgado a few different times. Him and I are he's like my creative soulmate. And I said, well, what do you think about this? Like, wouldn't it be cool to be the director of the Museum of Awe? And he had this great insight, and he said, you know, Museum of Awe, it's not like going to a museum. We live in the Museum of Awe, right? It is the oldest museum in existence, but we're just all too distracted, right? And we got things to do, places to go, buttons to press, and it's hard to see the things that are right there in front of us. And so we're going to take it on ourselves to be able to hopefully help you see the universe as if you were a 3-year-old, because if you've ever had a 3-year-old, right, everything is the Museum of Awe to them. And so the idea is that it's not in a museum, as I had mentioned. It's really in places that you would least expect it. So whether it's an office park or a salt mine or abandoned building or something like that, and it would be there for maybe 6 months, a year, and then it would disappear, and then maybe it'll pop up somewhere else, and maybe there's a few different themes, and so different themes, the whole thing could have multiple experiences. It's a museum of experiences, not a museum of objects. And it's sort of like a science museum, but it's not about facts and figures. It's really about sparking imagination. It's sort of like an art museum, but it's not pretentious. And it's sort of like a theater, but instead of being, out there looking up, you're actually on the stage, and the theater is happening all around you. And so we're trying to think about, various themes, and some themes could be like the majesty of the universe. What's actually maybe a little bit more interesting is the awe and wonder of the weird little things that are in your kitchen that you never quite thought about in the right way. All the way to the human condition, because no matter what the news has to say today, whenever people are sacrificing for other people, I can't help but have a moment of awe about that action. What I'm going to show you at the very end here is underneath here. And this is a demo that sort of gets me thinking about the Museum of Awe. And if my helper can come out, it's a fish tank. It's pretty exciting. Fish tank, you can buy this thing at Petco for, $10 or something like that. And what I'm spraying inside of here it's called isopropyl alcohol. And if you're keeping count, it has to be like the 99%, so it can't be the stuff that you get at Rite Aid. But I think if you go to Fry's Electronics, you can. Yeah. Okay. So go ahead. Yeah, come on out. So what I have here is. What was your name again? Rafa. This is Rafa. Everyone say hi, Rafa. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for helping me out here. And so down here, I have some dry ice. And everyone needs dry ice for science things. So this is super cold. Got to wear gloves, right? Whew, it is cold. I'm going to put it on here. And we're going to put this over here. And this is why someone big and strong is here. So let's see, hold it like this over here. If you hold this, yeah. So I'm going to do this. We haven't practiced this together yet. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to shove down, and then you're going to go over the, yep. Can you strap it?
One on one side,
yep.
one on the other?
Just, whoop. Almost there. There you go, perfect.
Hold on, build the edge a little bit.
Yep. There we go. It's even harder to do by yourself, so thank you. And then we're just going to flip this guy around and grab that one. So we're making this base really, really cold. And then, thank you. Awesome. We're fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your help. I'm going to push this aside. And we're going to be fine here. There we go. Okay. So this is super cold here, right? And then I'm going to put some of this on here, on the base. This is called a cloud chamber. So if you're ever, you can find tons of little demos online about cloud chamber. And then I'm going to put this out here. And then I'm going to put this upside down. So I have isopropyl alcohol that's up on top. And then I have isopropyl alcohol that's down below. And I'm going to have a little heater here pretty soon. And then I'm going to turn this on. Is this in your eyes? You okay? Yeah, okay. And then this is what happens. It creates a little fog that's about this high down here. And do you see little streaks up there? Those streaks have an amazing story because these are particles that have come from stars that have exploded. So stars explode, they send particles all over the place. Some of them get to our solar system, some of them get to the Earth, some of them get here to Glendale. They go through the walls of these buildings and then crash inside of this little tiny box. And for a fraction of a second, they show us that there really is an invisible world that's all around us, because millions of these things are flying through you and me right this second. And if you think about it, long time ago, a star exploded, and then another exploded, another star exploded, and there got to be dust that was all over the place. And eventually, the dust got clumped together, and it got big, it got hot, and that became our sun. And then some other dust clumped together, and those became our planets. And the rest of it became, the asteroids and comets. And these atoms that used to be in an exploding star then became animals and trees. But it is at this moment in galactic history that some of these atoms have become you and become me. It is a gift and a privilege to be alive. That's the goal of the Museum of Oz, that when you're done, that you're reminded of what a gift and privilege it is to be alive. And this is what fuels me when I wake up in the morning. I hear the little voice inside my head. It says, what are you going to do with this brief moment in time? Thank you, guys.